Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. So Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 18th of October 2024. This is a military aid news video. We're going to start with quotes from Zelensky from yesterday from talking at Brussels to the European Council, where he's discussing the victory plan. He was kind of discussing the point number one, which is we need accession to NATO. This has been misinterpreted, misrepresented. The idea for some is that, oh my goodness, Ukraine are thinking about arming themselves with nukes and whatnot. It's not the case. So he says either, quote, either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons and then it will be a defense for us, or Ukraine will be in NATO. NATO countries are not at war today. All people are alive in NATO countries, and that is why we choose NATO over nuclear weapons. So it's either we do nuclear weapons or NATO. Now, you could say there's some kind of strong-arming, blackmailing going on, like, if you don't give us NATO, we'll just go and get nuclear weapons. So that people have long been questioning whether actually that's something Ukraine would do anyway, because they probably have the know-how left over from the Soviet era, and it could be quite useful. So places like the Baltic nations and Poland haven't been attacked because they're in Article 5, they're in NATO and they're protected by Article 5. Ukraine had their nukes taken away from them in a kind of non-proliferation, whereby the Budapest Memorandum was signed, and that was Russia, UK, France and the US saying, we'll assure you security if we take your nukes off you. So they were gone. Then they had the security of those nations, but one of those nations attacked them, invaded them. And then the other nations are like, okay, we'll help you, but you can't join NATO. So then they say, look, either we do nukes or join NATO, and we choose NATO, so let us join NATO. And nukes arguably would have stopped them from being attacked by Russia. They are a deterrent. Okay. A new tranche under the Ukraine facility will be allocated to Ukraine by the end of the year, said Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission. It's not yet known how much money will be allocated, so this is not the frozen asset loan thing. This is a Ukraine peace facility. It's a €50 billion macro financial assistance to Ukraine over 4 years. So more of that will be coming by the end of the year. Norway will provide $270 million into Ukraine's energy sector to address the damage caused by Russian attacks and assist the Ukrainian population through the challenging winter months as the Russian strikes continue. And then so good stuff. Norway, there's I think a demining conference going on. Almost $70 million for demining Ukraine. A new innovative project with Palantir has been pledged, and an additional GCS2, additional GCS 200 demining machines as well for the Ukrainian government. Emergency services. The first day of the UMAC 2024 in Lausanne was full of announcements from our partners. All these decisions once again show, says Yulia Sviridenko, that the world stands with Ukraine. It's a manifestation of the willingness of our partners to support us on this long and difficult journey together. We've already proven that by joining forces we can make real progress. Canada will provide Ukraine with $47 million as a military aid package, including small arms, equipment, ammunition, and that's been announced by the MOD there. Part of the funds will also support training of Ukrainian troops. Canada's done quite a bit on the training front. German aid to Ukraine talks about 4,000 loitering munitions, some strike drones being promised by Germany to Ukraine. There's been talk about other aid packages from Germany, but actually I think that they'd already been pre-announced and pre-placed. Quite often happens with Germany. People have announced, oh, there's a new package, and actually it's not a new package. There was also one alongside that from the Netherlands that might be new. I'm not sure. It's 6 howitzers, Dieter howitzers, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, 4,000 loitering munitions here. The question is, were they from this, will they be from this German company that makes the Maus drone? And the answer is no, at least they haven't been hit up with a contract. They could produce 4,000 in 2 months, but they haven't been hit with the contract. So it could be that Germany's going to buy these from Lithuania or fund them within Ukraine. Don't know at the moment. I presume there aren't too many loitering munition drone manufacturers in Germany to wonder who it is that would provide them. Japan, their Pro drone is set to supply, the company is set to supply Ukraine with cutting edge artificial intelligence drones for humanitarian demining efforts. So these are to be used to demine, not to sort of attack Russian positions. Previously, Japan supported Ukraine by delivering 4 ALIS systems for mine detection and 50 metal detectors. So good news there. Okay, moving on. I thought I was going to sneeze then. So this is Justin. Moving on to Chinese support of Russia and then North Korean support. We're going to spend a little bit of time on North Korea. Okay, Justin. So not Justin. I'm not speaking to him. I'm not speaking to you, Justin. Chinese and Russian companies are collaborating to produce long-range attack drones for use against Ukraine, defying warnings from Washington, according to US officials, Bloomberg reports. Now, these are the Garpia drones. We have heard about these before, but it's interesting that it's coming from official channels. There's an exchange between Alex Rafoglu and Nosferatu on behalf of the US government here. Let's see what they have to say. I'm just going to turn up the sound to this one because it's not that loud. So bish bash bosh, there you go.
Different conflict. Sanctions were announced today on Chinese drone companies. The language that you guys have used suggests that China has been apparently producing and sending weapons to Russia to use in Ukraine. This is the first time as departure from its promises to the US. Is that fair assessment?
So we have seen for some time Chinese companies providing components to Russian companies that Russian companies then use to turn into machinery, weapons, other components that Russia could use in its war. This was the first, and we have imposed sanctions on a number of those companies. This was the first time we actually saw a Chinese company manufacturing a weapon itself that then was used on the battlefield by Russia, was sent to Russia and then used on the battlefield. And that's why we imposed the sanctions that we did today. And that is why we continue to work with our allies and partners around the world to make clear to China that this practice is unacceptable and they need to take steps to counter it.
Thank you. And on Tuesday, you expressed your concerns about reports on North Korea spying troops.
So, in other words, no real change, but he goes on to talk about North Korea.
For Russia to use in Ukraine. 2 days passed. The secretary had a phone call with his counterpart in Ukraine, and the president spoke with President Zelensky. Do you have any new intelligence? They do have. Did they hand it to you? Any details? Anything you have learned?
I don't have anything further I can offer today.
China, North Korea, now Iran. If you ask average Ukrainians, they're going to tell you, how do you expect us to fight against all these powers all alone?
Because they have on their side the United States of America, a number of countries in Europe, a number of countries around the world. Remember, we have marshaled a coalition of 50 countries, more than 50 countries, who support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty and have continued to provide support in a number of ways: military support, economic support, diplomatic support over the past 2 years, and will continue to provide support.
I guess my question is, do all these new facts change the calculus on your end in terms of...
No.
Thank you, Matt.
And so there you go. Just not a lot of official change. Just, we'll continue supporting Ukraine, and that's how we'll, adapt to these new pressures, or a lot of nothing there. Anton Gerashchenko says the United States imposed, so outside of kind of any military calculation and provision of X, Y, and Z, the US are, however, doing things with the US Treasury. As I often say, they're kind of the unsung heroes, often, the US Treasury Department. So the US imposed sanctions on 2 China-based drone suppliers and their alleged Russian partners who produce drones for Russia. Chinese companies have collaborated with Russian defense firms in the production of Moscow's Garpia series long-range drones, US Treasury Department said. The drones were designed, developed, and made in China before being sent to Russia for use on the battlefield. The US Treasury Department accused Xiamen Limbach aircraft design company, engine company, goodness me, you can read, Pierce, come on, based on the coastal city of Xiamen, of producing drone engines for the Garpia series. The US also accused the other sanctioned Chinese company, Redelpus, Vector Industry Shenzhen Co., of working with a Russian defense firm to facilitate the shipment of the drones to Russia. The Treasury Department said Redelpus had also sent shipments to Russia of components that can be used in drones, including aircraft engines, parts for automatic data processing machines, and electrical components through Russian defense firm TSK Vector. In addition, the US imposed punitive measures on the owner of TSK Vector, a Russian national, and another company he owns. Good news, and that really needs to stop. China are facilitating Russia's prosecution of the war. Nearly 11,000 Korean troops will be ready to fight in Ukraine by November the 1st, says the intelligence head Kirilo Budanov. The first unit of 2,600 soldiers is heading to Russia's Kursk region, with more infantry currently training in eastern Russia for combat. Okay, this is a really big concern. So, South Korea has also come out and said that it believes North Korea has sent troops to Russia. The country's spy agency said North Korea was participating in the war in Ukraine and had decided to send 12,000 troops, including a special forces unit. So this isn't anymore just the Ukrainians saying this. The South Koreans, who should know the best, are claiming this as well. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol held an unscheduled security meeting with key intelligence, military and national security officials to discuss North Korean troops' involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine. So there we go. Ukrainian President Zelensky said Pyongyang is preparing 10,000 soldiers to join the full-scale invasion. And we've had South Korean intelligence says North has sent troops to Russia's war in Ukraine. So you can check that out in, for example, Associated Press. And they give a few more details there. There was an article, I don't know where this is from, North Korea, Yonhap. This is a South Korean news agency. North Korea's support to Russia may be civilian personnel rather than troops, South Korean Vice Defense Minister said. But actually, we've got evidence, direct evidence they are troops, it appears. So we'll move on from that. The North Korean regime, says the RAND organization, has likely only sent elite North Korean personnel to perform such functions, fearing that other North Koreans would probably defect to the West. So you send a bunch of troops over there, there's going to be a lot of people running away to escape from North Korean dictatorship. Now, Special Kherson Cat does a bit of analysis of some satellite imagery here, which I think will be pretty useful to look at. Okay, South Korean National Intelligence Service said about the transportation of North Korean troops and weapons to Russia. Quote, according to the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, 4 landing ships and 3 escort ships belonging to the Russian Pacific Fleet completed the first transport of approximately 1,500 North Korean special forces from the areas near Chongjin, Hamhung and Musadan to Vladivostok, Russia, during the same period, and a second transport operation is scheduled to take place soon. This is the first time the Russian Navy has entered North Korean waters since 1990. In addition, large transport aircraft such as the AN-124 of the Russian Air Force are frequently flying between Vladivostok and Pyongyang. The North Korean soldiers dispatched to Russia are currently stationed at Russian military bases in the Far East, including Vladivostok, Ussurisk, and Khabarovsk and Blagoveshchensk, and are expected to be deployed to the front lines as soon as they complete their adaptation training. Imagine how much this is going to affect the morale of the Ukrainians. They've been fighting hammer and tooth, like to hold on to their territory, fighting against the Russians, huge attrition, being incredibly demanding and demoralizing. Anyway, and then they hear, oh, by the way, there's going to be 12,000 North Koreans shipped in to fight. Where's the help from everyone else? You know, I just can't begin to think how terrible they must feel. Also, considering the size of the containers loaded onto cargo ships travelling between North Korea and Russia, it appears that more than 8 million rounds of 122mm and 152mm shells have been provided to Russia so far. Activities of Russian ships for the purpose of transporting North Korean troops. Synopsis of Russian landing ships transporting North Korean troops in the East Sea. And basically there's lots of evidence that's been presented to suggest that this is happening. Military facility in Ussurisk, Primorsky Krai, Russia. Estimated 400 North Korean personnel gathered on a parade ground there. So that is, pretty good satellite imagery of people there. And then a military facility in Khabarovsk, Russia. Estimated number of North Korean personnel there, 240 people gathered for a parade. So this is looking like it's actually happening. There is, remember the video I showed this morning, claiming to show North Korean soldiers training in Russia. The person on that was saying, look at the hordes, they're coming here to conquer. In other words, they're definitely not Russians, the way that was being framed. That's been geolocated to Kyiv, about 130 kilometers from Vladivostok. So really far over in the east, which is what you'd expect. They want to train these troops out of sight of anyone else. Really, it's only satellite imagery and obviously that video that's come through. Now, this will keep these people safe from strikes from Ukrainian missiles, of course, as well. Now, Special Kherson Cat, then... no, that's what we've just gone through. I accidentally have got that twice. This is one. Tatarigami then says this. According to Yonhap, the North Koreans have sent 12,000 troops, including special forces, to Russia for their war against Ukraine, as per their source in South Korea's intelligence. This aligns with an earlier statement from Ukraine's military intelligence. If accurate, it means that the core-size force from North Korea is aiding Russia in the invasion of a European country. Meanwhile, on October the 16th, German Chancellor Scholz expressed his willingness to discuss a just peace in Ukraine with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So this is Putin throwing down his way of forcing Ukraine to capitulate, getting the North Koreans involved. How will this play with the rest of the world? This not only appears weak, but also reinforces Putin's belief that Western leadership is too divided and fragile to sustain a united front for the long haul. After all, both Europe and the US have poured substantial resources into this war, depleting their weapon and ammunition stocks. From Russia's perspective, its successes on the battlefield aren't just victories over Ukraine, but over the combined economies and production capacities of the West. I think it's a really important point. Some may argue that Russia turning to North Korea shows how desperate its situation is. Perhaps it does, but the fact remains Russia is finding new sources of manpower. Absolutely on point. So one, both things are true. One, it's desperate. Russia are desperate. They are in trouble. Two, North Korea get them out of trouble. This is why I said earlier in the war, the only way that Russia can prevail in this war is if China get involved. I didn't even consider North Korea, right? They weren't even on the radar for me. But now they literally are on the radar, or they're on the satellite imagery. So there are ways where Russia can, if not prevail, then prolong this war for sure. Who is stepping up for Ukraine, says Tatarigami. While Russia pulls in thousands of troops from North Korea, Ukraine is asked to mobilise its smallest demographic, sacrificing its future, while Western nations debate whether they should contribute even a fraction to their GDP. US foreign policy is somewhat paralysed by the upcoming elections, and much of Europe remains inactive, ignoring the fact that North Korean soldiers are about to fight in a European war. They rationalise it away. It's not an EU country, not a NATO member, not our problem. French President Macron once talked about sending troops to Ukraine, but it never moved beyond words. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un made no announcements. He simply sent a core-size force to help Russia. China is watching, Iran is watching, the global south is watching, and what do they see? They see a US too focused on internal political discord and even a failure to protect its own interests in the Strait of Aden, despite being the world's sole naval guarantor to secure trade. I'm not even talking about Europe, which is even more interested in that. At the same time, European leaders like Scholz are pursuing peace with Putin out of a reluctance to stand for their values or security interests. If you can't see how this weakness will reshape the global security landscape, and if North Korean soldiers in Europe aren't enough of a wake-up call, then I doubt anything will make the West act, even to protect itself. Not sure I disagree. And at the BRICS summit just going on now in Kazan, I didn't realise this was actually happening now. So Moscow and Tehran will sign a cooperation agreement after the BRICS summit, the Iranian ambassador to Russia said. But Putin said this, and I presume he's referring to North Koreans. I welcome the new recruits, he said. This is a military term for those who will fight at war, and that is exactly how Putin sees those countries. Well, okay, so he's talking about the new recruits as in the new members of BRICS, or the new countries who want to join BRICS, rather than the new recruits that they're getting from North Korea. So maybe I have misinterpreted that, although, I have a feeling, as I do the live stream tonight with Jake Bro, that we'll be talking a lot about this, because this, to me, is massive. So I think it requires a little bit of unpicking and some discussion. So I look forward to that, although I wish it wasn't a discussion we were having, because this is an expansion of what I already think is a world war. And this is just, compounding the issue. I had a discussion, big old discussion on Facebook earlier today with someone who is aligned with me as a kind of left winger, but has sided, is very pro-Palestine. I'm pro-Palestine as like Palestinian people. I think there needs to be a two-state solution. I think ideally, ideologically, a one-state solution. I think that's less realistic. Two-state solution is more realistic. But I think Netanyahu's government is very right-wing and very problematic and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of similarities I have with this guy. But he's like, why do I not see your passion with regard to Gaza? I'm like, dude, I'm one human being. I pour my heart and soul into Ukraine. Like, I don't talk about, do you talk about the genocide of the Rohingya and the Myanmar junta? Do you talk about the Uyghurs all the time in China? No. So, like, you don't talk about them. And do you talk about climate change, which might be even greater an existential threat to us all? No. So we talk about our own things, but it's not a zero-sum game. Me talking about Ukraine all the time, it doesn't mean that that thing doesn't matter, or it's not at the expense of that thing. So don't come at me like that. And here's the real argument, is that I'm so interested in Ukraine because it is singularly the most important thing going on in the world right now, because it is truly a global war. And when you've got North Korea getting involved, I could go to this guy, look, grain that's going to Gaza, some of that is coming from Ukraine because it's a breadbasket of the world. Gaza is not the breadbasket of the world. Like I said, it's an important conflict and it's terrible and people are dying unnecessarily and it's horrible. I don't deny any of that. It is horrific what's going on. But it doesn't have the impact on global security and geopolitics that this conflict does. This is freaking massive. We are involved in this conventionally, like we're providing all sorts of weapons for Ukraine. And likewise, so are China, North Korea, and Iran for Russia. So we 50 plus nations are helping out Ukraine with military hardware, with money, with sanctions, with trade wars, with political wars, with information wars, with cyber wars. We are involved in a world war. This is a world war going on now. That's why I am so impassioned when I talk about it, because it's freaking important. And it is. I'm sorry, it is more important than the horrible things that are going on in Gaza. So you can talk about the death toll being on a much smaller area and therefore, some kind of ratio to land mass being a more horrible thing. More people have died in Ukraine, but let's not have a competition of what's the worst conflict. What I'm saying is this is a terrible conflict, that is a terrible conflict, but this one is affecting much more of the world geopolitically. This is a massive, massive event taking place. And that North Korea are getting involved. And that the US intelligence thought that we were a hair's breadth away from a nuclear missile being used by the Russians is not something that ever would have happened with Gaza and Israel. This is, and that you can argue they're all connected, right? But we are not getting attacked on a daily and weekly basis by either Palestinian or Hamas driven or Israeli driven information warfare and cyber attacks. That is happening by the Russians. Our elections are being meddled in by the Russians. So don't give me this, you need to be more impassioned and talk more about that. I am one human being with one brain and 24 hours, and I work my freaking socks off obsessed with this because it is the single most important thing going on in the world. Apart from maybe our complete absence of care for the climate, which sadly for me is something that would ordinarily drive me. This is not helping that, and it's taking our eye off the ball. So we have, I watched a news piece this morning on further bleaching of corals around the world and seawater's rising in temperature, and it's like terrible. As someone who's used to scuba dive, that is terrible. But this conflict here, this requires so much of our attention because we've got to get this right. There is too much on the line. It makes me angry and it makes me upset that we are sitting by and allowing this to take place. That we are allowing North Korea to just waltz into this arena. Russia are already getting half of their artillery ammunition from North Korea, and we're like, well, nothing's really changed our calculus. Oh, don't want to be too escalatory. Meanwhile, they're escalating by the ton. Man, it does my nut in. Anyway, sorry to rant. I almost got pretty emotional then as well. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon.